This video is sponsored by Squarespace. I've been messing around with Broken Anvil's top secret new paint line for a few months now, and I thought I would make a quick little impressions video to give you my current thoughts on this new paint line and to show off a few of the models that I've been painting with these new paints. To summarize, I really like this paint line. They are extremely pigment dense, the colors are nice and saturated and vibrant, and as of right now, they've quickly become my go-to standard acrylic paint line for layering and glazing. However, let's discuss the elephant in the room. Is Broken Anvil paying me to make this video? No, Squarespace is. But in all seriousness, no money changed hands between me and Broken Anvil in the making of this video. I have made sponsored content for them before. I am a big fan of several of their products, and I would say I am on friendly terms with a few of the people who work there, so you should probably know that this is going to be a little bit of a biased review. However, just like any of my paint review videos, the goal here is to educate and demonstrate so you can make your own decision about whether these paints are something you want to invest in or not. And with all of that out of the way, let's start at the beginning. A few months ago, I was sent these paints in the mail, and they came with a letter attached from Josh Davis, who is the designer of these paints as well as the head studio painter over at Broken Anvil. In this letter, he explains a few things about these paints up front. Number one, these are high quality paints using non-synthetic pigments. Number two, because of this, these are not non-toxic paints. Hi, Editor Dana here. I just wanted to chime in and say that I was speaking with Josh this morning, and he told me the production paints are actually not toxic. He just marked the prototypes that way to be totally safe before he knew everything about the paints. So just a minor correction. So right away, this description put me in the mindset that these paints might be a little bit similar to Golden So Flat paints, which I'm a huge fan of. He also explains a few other things, mostly about how the paints are designed with color theory in mind, how they are designed for glazing, and how they can be thinned down about 50% with water to be used sort of like contrast paints. So with lots of stuff to investigate, I dug right in and started experimenting with these paints. And I quickly found that I was correct in assuming these were a little bit like Golden So Flat paints. They have that same high pigment load, high opacity, and matte finish, along with the extremely vibrant, saturated colors that I was expecting. The main difference being that the medium used here is a lot more conducive to miniature painting than fine art purposes. These paints are still a little bit thick, and like most miniature paints, you probably want to thin them with just a little bit of water before application, but not nearly as thick as your typical artist acrylics like the Golden So Flat paints. They also are not hyper matte like those Golden So Flat paints are. I would say they're more of a standard matte look, which I really like. And in general, I think I am much more likely to reach for these paints on my desk when I'm looking for a really vibrant yellow or a really striking green, rather than going with my previous standard, which was the Golden So Flat paints. Not because one is necessarily better than the other, but one of these is already pre-thinned for me, which was one of the harder parts about working with Golden So Flat paints. Speaking of thinning things down, just like Josh mentioned in his letter, these paints work absurdly good as glazes. You don't even need to add glaze medium. You just add as much water as you like, and you can actually thin these down quite a lot before they break down. I've also found that these mix really well with my glaze medium of choice, Viejo Glaze Medium, whenever I do want to extend the drying time or increase the flow to get some more subtle blending. Broken Anvil also claims these can be used sort of like contrast paints when you thin them down about 50-50 with water. But in my personal experience, I think there's a difference between it being possible to use the paints this way and this being the ideal use case for these paints. I was able to get this effect to work well with a few of the colors, but in general, I found it was a little bit difficult to figure out exactly how much water was 50%, and instead what I found worked best when I was trying to achieve an effect like this was to just thin down the paint slightly, apply it onto the model, and then water it down on the surface of the model with a wet brush. And so, yeah, I guess they do technically work for this purpose, but I really don't feel like this is the main strength of these paints. So when I'm looking to do some speed painting, I am much more likely to reach for my Citadel Contrast paints, Army Painter Speed Paints, or Vallejo Express Color, just because they are more made for this purpose and they're pre-thinned for that use. And then use my Broken Anvil paints for the things they are really good at, which is layering, highlights, and glazing. So in summary, these are really high quality acrylics. They work great for layering, great for glazing, and will sort of work as a contrast paint replacement if that's your thing. But what about the secret sauce? What is it about these paints that made me want to make a whole video about it? Quite simply, it is the way these paints are organized, the specific paints they have chosen to include in this essential palette, and the different ways that each paint interacts with the other ones. To explain this better, you might want to go and check out my full color chart for these paints over at howlcorp.com/bampaints. And it was extremely easy for me to put this page together thanks to this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform that I've been using for over a decade now for all of my website needs. You just pick one of their expertly designed templates, add in any pages you might like, and customize or don't customize things to your heart's content, using their extremely intuitive drag and drop design system. No coding or technical knowledge required. If you can assemble modular plastic miniatures, you can make a Squarespace site. Personally, I have been using my current Squarespace site to house all of the additional content that I want to share that I can't fit into these videos, such as reference documents or a place to buy a pale sand receptacle. So if you like to build a website, why not head to squarespace.com today for a free trial? And when you're ready to launch your site, go to squarespace.com/DanaHowell for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. But what about the secret sauce? What is it about these paints that made me want to make a whole video about it? Quite simply, it is the way these paints are organized, the specific paints they have chosen to include in this essential palette, and the different ways that each paint interacts with the other ones. I've never seen anything like this in a paint line. It's almost like they've gamified painting. It's really interesting, and I'm going to do my best to explain it without you actually having tried the paints. So in Josh's letter, he mentioned that he mixed the palette with built-in color theory in mind, and I didn't really understand what he meant until I actually started using these paints on my miniatures. The core set, which they are calling the Essential Palette, consists of 40 colors. 5 of each of the standard primary colors, 4 browns, 3 whites, and 3 blacks. This seems simple enough, but much like a tight rule set in a game, there's a lot more complexity here once you dig into it. And to illustrate this, I'm going to show you how I organize my set of these paints for maximum usability. So each of the primary colors has 5 different versions included, labeled from 0 to 4, with the higher the number being the darker the color. But this isn't just a 5-step layering system. Each color in this 5-step system can actually vary in hue quite a lot. And on the production models, they've actually marked whether they are a cool version of this color or a warm version of this color to make it a lot easier to know what to mix it with. Just within the purples, for example, we have everything from a light pink to a strong, nice magenta to a more standard purple, and the darkest one being a really intense dark indigo. And this is true of each of the primary colors that they've selected. Each one is full of little interesting differences between all of the hues, and they're just really fun to experiment with. So while you can use this as a layering system, it's not really intended for that purpose, as each one can be layered up in highlights or down in shadows by just adding a little bit of the cool white or the warm white, or the cool black or the warm black. Speaking of which, have I mentioned the warm blacks, the cool blacks, the warm whites, the cool whites? It's very exciting. This is easily the coolest part of this paint line for me, no pun intended, and if you're going to buy any of these paints, I would recommend checking these ones out. This set comes with 3 blacks and 3 whites. 1 warm version, 1 cool version, and 1 additive version for each of the blacks and whites. And here's how it works. So as painters, we're often taught, don't add highlights with just white, use a warm white if it's a warm color, use a cool white if it's a cool color. This is pretty standard stuff, but I haven't seen any paint lines build this in as part of their core philosophy. Whereas I feel like a lot of miniature paint lines are designed for convenience, having the exact specific colors you need, this paint line feels like it's been designed to encourage you to experiment with color and to learn. Anyway, back to the warm whites and cool whites and warm blacks and cool blacks. So the cool white and the warm white flow and cover brilliantly and have become my go-to colors to mix into other shades to layer up in highlights. And if you want a slightly brighter or more primary white, they give you this other bottle called White Additive. And you can add that into either the warm or the cool white to make each one a little bit brighter, a little bit more intense, a little bit more primary. This sounds like a simple thing, but once you try it, I think you'll see it's kind of a game changer. And everything I just said about the cool and warm white colors and the additive, the same goes for the black colors. We get a cool black, a warm black, and an additive black if you want to make either of those a little bit darker. Personally, I wouldn't have even thought to use a warm black or a cool black. I just use a black or a darker color, but now that I have these two paints, again, they've kind of changed the way I think about shading my models when I'm doing layering style painting. Also, just a fun fact, another thing Josh mentioned in his letter is that you can use the cool white and the cool black to do some really cool non-metallic metal blending, and yeah, it works really well. Just those two colors can make a really nice looking non-metallic steel by blending them together. I also think I've come up with a pretty good recipe for non-metallic gold by layering up just the darkest brown color, adding in the darkest yellow color, and then finally adding in the warm white color as the final highlight. Finally, they have included 4 brown colors in this set. And just by mixing in some of the other colors like various pinks and reds, you can do all kinds of fun stuff and easy variation with skin tones. Specifically, I would encourage you to check out Red 4, which I think makes an excellent undertone for just about any skin tone. So in summary, there's a lot of cool things you can do with this paint line, and I really think it earns its namesake of the Essential Palette. Just by arranging your colors like this on a nail polish rack or whatever organization system you want to use, it can be really fun to see what happens when you mix a color with the one next to it, or just above it, or diagonal to it. They all have interesting interactions, and it's fun to try them all out. And while I would absolutely love to keep rambling on about all the tips and tricks that I've found for using this paint line, this video is getting a little long, and we should probably start wrapping it up. So if you want more information on this paint line, or you do want to purchase a few of them to try them out, I have provided links down in the description to the current easiest way to purchase them or to get information about them. Thank you so much to Broken Anvil for sending me these paints early to test them out. Thank you to all of you lovely patrons for supporting the channel, and I will see you in the next video.